Hey guys, tonight we wake in a waterlogged trench at first light, the cold mud clinging to your boots like an unwelcome hug as the distant rumble of artillery greets the morning. You probably won't survive this without learning a few hard lessons, and trust me, you'll need everyone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through sludge ankle-deep breath, rising in little puffs that dissipate into the gray dawn. The world feels narrow to the width of your duckboards, those creaky wooden planks meant to keep your feet dry, but more often serving as a death trap when they rot or dislodge. Mainstream fact: the average British infantryman spent around 1 week in the firing line before being withdrawn if he was lucky. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers smeared themselves with crocodile dung-based sunscreen to fend off trench fever, though it smelled worse than the mud itself. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies did more harm than good. Your trench kisses your knees, walls slick with muck, and bits of decomposing wood. You peek over the edge and see the far trench wall mirrored in your muddy reflection, as if the enemy were standing just as wet and miserable. The parapet you cling to is no higher than your shoulder, and behind you duckboards form a narrow path. That's your lifeline. Without them, you'd sink into knee-deep ooze, laced with wastewater and shattered timbers. A shrill whistle cracks through the air and you freeze. You know the routine: a sentry has spotted movement in no man's land. You stare at the muddy expanse, toward tangled barbed wire that seems to mock every attempt at crossing. Mainstream fact: the average daily barrage consumed over 2 million shells per mile of front. Fringe tidbit: some troops claimed that rats grew to the size of small cats. Thanks to all the rotting corpses, they even nicknamed one giant specimen Goliath. Historians still argue whether Goliath was a legend or just an especially bold rat. Your fingers itch inside your uniform. Lice are a constant companion, creeping under collars and burrowing into seams. You scratch at your neck absent-mindedly, watching specks crawl across your sleeve. The battalion camp rumor says that vermin outnumber soldiers 10 to 1 in some sectors, and you believe it. You try to inspect your gear, but the light is dim and your hands shake from cold and fatigue. Somewhere behind you, water trickles down the duckboards, pooling around your feet. You imagine your footsteps sinking into ankle-deep filth, mixed with stagnant water, and you're right. The drainage ditch ahead is clogged as usual, turning your breastwork into a shallow swamp. Mainstream fact: engineers were supposed to install proper drainage, but the relentless shelling often collapsed their efforts within hours. Fringe tidbit: certain regiments kept drainage gangs at night to hack channels with entrenching tools, only to have them filled by dawn. Historians still argue whether that work ever really improved conditions or simply gave sappers more nightmares. A low moan drifts across the trench, and you look over to see a body leaning against the supporting timber, eyes half closed. He didn't sleep. None of you did. Sleep is a luxury in these trenches. You close your eyes for a moment, the drone of artillery lulling you into a false calm. When you open them again, the mud has shifted and you're ankle-deep yet again. Your stomach rumbles, but breakfast is a distant memory. The cook's hut collapsed 2 days ago under shell fire, and rations have tasted like tin more often than not. You shove a crust of bread into your mouth, washing it down with tepid water from your canteen. Worse than hunger is thirst. Filtered water is rare, and most of it tastes of cordite and clay. You take a deep breath, inhaling the damp, earthy scent of rain-softened soil. You wonder how anyone first thought to build a trench here. In this flat, exposed wasteland, mainstream fact trench warfare solidified along the Western Front after the Battle of Ypres in 1914. Fringe, tidbit, one unit painted a section green when they finally got hold of pigment, hoping to trick enemies into thinking it was untrodden grass. Only shells had the same idea. Historians still argue whether camouflage schemes ever truly fooled the enemy or simply boosted morale. Mud coats every surface from your helmet rim to the insides of your jacket. You claw at the pocket to pull out your notebook, the pages warped and smeared. An entry reads, Day 14, still breathing, still here. You straighten up, spine aching, and peer down the narrow passage. The faint glow of sunrise threatens, but never quite breaks into warmth. You brace yourself for another day of watching, waiting, and mud-slipping misery, knowing that this morning is just one of many identical dawns. Yet somewhere under this endless gray, you hold on to the hope that rotation will come soon, rest and relative comfort lie just beyond the wire. You blink again and prepare to face whatever the trench has in store today. You shift your weight on the duckboards, the wood groaning beneath you as you edge closer to the lip of the trench. Before you lie the razor wire frontline serpentine coils of barbed steel glinting dully in the half-light, draped over wooden stakes like a grotesque Christmas decoration you never asked for. The mud around it is churned into a porridge of clay and shell fragments, dotted with puddles that reflect the gray sky and your haunted expression. You peer across this no-man's land, heart thudding. Mainstream fact barbed wire on the Western Front could stretch up to 3 strands high and 4 strands deep, creating obstacles over 100 yards wide in some sectors. Fringe tidbit. Some soldiers reported finding bits of wire woven into the fur of dead horses, leading to the grim joke that the cavalry had gone full punk rock. Historians still argue whether adding extra wire coils slowed attacks or simply drove men mad with frustration. A bored gull cries overhead, circling like it knows you're trapped in a soap opera of mud and metal. You wonder if it finds the scene as depressing as you do, or if it's just looking for a discarded ration tin to peck at. You swallow, tasting cordite on your tongue, and wonder how anyone ever crossed this gauntlet alive. The wire is interlaced with trip flares and booby traps. One wrong step and you'd light up like a Christmas tree or vanish beneath a collapse of earth. Your fingers brush the mud-caked wire, tracing the outline of a sharp barb. It digs into your glove, drawing a drop of blood that beads and falls onto the sludge below. You lick your gloves clean, grimacing at the taste of iron and grit. You remind yourself, jokes aside, trench grooming isn't optional. Joke 1. It's the only time in your life you'll wish for scissors more than for your mother's cooking. Out in the mire, shell craters loom, like open wounds on the battlefield's skin. Some are shallow, others are deep enough to drown in if you're not careful. You spot an old sap trench, half buried now, its wooden supports slick and rotted. You swallow again as you imagine reoccupying that ghost passage. Any moment a corpse or worse. A rat the size of a cat might lurch out. You glance at the horizon, shattered trees resemble skeletons reaching for mercy. Mainstream fact, by 1917, the average tree density in a Ypres salient had fallen by over 90% due to relentless shelling. Fringe tidbit, some units painted stick figure faces on the remaining stumps to mock the invisible enemy. Historians still argue whether this gallows humor strengthened unit cohesion or just signaled collective madness. You tuck your chin into your collar, adjusting your helmet so it doesn't slip off when you climb out later. You can almost taste the sulfur of spent shells and the metallic stench of wet earth. Your nose wrinkles a rat, scuttles across the wire, dragging a half-eaten loaf back into the trench. You let out a soft chuckle, dark if anything. Joke 2. Only in a war zone would you see rats on a bread run and think, finally, someone's getting my leftovers. Your fingers twitch with anticipation and dread. You've memorized every coil of wire, every gnarled girder, in case you have to navigate this nightmare without a guide. You edge back, but the earth beneath your foot gives way, mud oozes between your toes, pulling at your boot like it wants to keep you here forever. A pulse of panic spikes through you until you remember to breathe. You lean forward, peering at the muddy field before you. Barbed wire shelves are strung in staggered rows. Beyond them, the land is a tomb of cratered blasts and shattered trenches, all pointing back to the central trench like jagged teeth. You trace a path in your mind, one that might have worked if the wiring parties hadn't refilled every gap by dawn. Mainstream fact wiring parties, teams of soldiers sent out at night to repair or lay new barbed wire, faced one of the highest casualty rates, often up to 70% in heavily shelled sectors. Fringe tidbit: some wiring parties carried small wooden models of the wire layouts, carved on pocket-sized boards, to practice navigation, though more than one man got lost, following a model that didn't match the muddy reality. Historians still argue whether these models offered any true tactical advantage, or were simply talismans against fear. You glance up at your sergeant's silhouette against the pale sky. He nods once, a curt gesture that says, "Time to look death in the eye." You knot your scarf tighter, trying to ignore the sharp whisper of wire against your glove. Your pulse pounds. You could swear you hear the distant laughter of past soldiers echoing off the crater walls. You step back and close your eyes, inhaling the damp air. You imagine the horizon beyond this barrier, rolling fields green in summer. If you could only get there. You open your eyes and it's still wire, still mud, still the same miserable expectation. Joke 3. You're beginning to think the real enemy here is landscaping. Your teeth chatter as the wind picks up, rustling the coils. You wonder if you'll ever feel dry again, or if dry has become as alien as happiness. The barbed wire's cruel geometry feels like a spider's web, and you, the fly, can't stop buzzing around its edge. You take a final glance, memorizing every dent in the wire stakes, knowing you might have to navigate this hell more than once. You step away, ducking down, before you slip forward into the coils. The trench swallows you back in the parapet, closing above your head like a coffin lid. You stare at the mud-slick wall as you move on, ears ringing with the faint clink of wire. You wonder if this is the closest thing to purgatory you'll ever know, and if at least purgatory has better drainage. You press your back against the damp timber wall, your heart still racing from that glimpse of razor wire. A soft squeak at your shoulder jolts you upright. Rats and lice have become your unwelcome roommates here. You swivel in the dim trench light, squinting into the shadows where a gray-furred rat, the size of your hand, twitches its whiskers, sizing you up. You probably won't survive this without accepting that vermin rule these trenches. Mainstream fact: trench rats grew so large that some men reported them as big as cats, feasting on scraps and sometimes on fallen comrades. Fringe tidbit: one regiment supposedly trained rats to run messages through narrow tunnel sections, though delivery times were predictably erratic. Historians still argue whether these rat couriers ever existed or were just another muddy legend. You flick a chunk of mud from your helmet brim and try to ignore the rat inching closer, its beady eyes reflecting your panic. Its claws click on wood as it edges along your duckboard, carrying half a torn piece of bread between its teeth. You snort. Joke 1. Only here would you envy a rat's dining options. Your gaze drops to the back of your tunic where you feel a maddening itch. You pinch at the cloth, revealing a cluster of lice crawling along a seam. You flick one off, watching it land in the sludge, only to scuttle out of sight. You catch a fellow Tommy, stripping his jacket and flicking lice into the mud with jerky movements that look more dance than defense. Historians still argue whether delousing gear like the fine-tooth combs officers sometimes carried made any real difference or simply provided a fleeting sense of control. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers boiled their clothes in urine, believing the ammonia would repel lice, but the stench often drove comrades farther away than the bugs. You try to salvage hope by checking your own pockets for spare rations, but the tin is empty. Rats got there first. You curse under your breath. Next time, bury your food deeper. You think the rats have a knack for sniffing out the most well-hidden snacks. Your fingers glide along the trench wall, searching for the next spike in the timber that might conceal hidden larvae. You recall reading that Tommy skirts were coated in creosote to keep woodworm at bay. Yet, here in the trenches, neither creosote nor gun oil could stop nature's army. Mainstream fact lice outbreaks in WWI trenches led to trench fever, which could incapacitate soldiers for weeks. You rub your neck, feeling tiny nips where bites have begun to swell. The itching is relentless, a crawling torment that even the dull roar of artillery cannot drown out. Joke 2. You trade a week on the front line for a small bottle of anti-itch cream, no questions asked. A sudden skitter and a dull thud draw your gaze to the muddy floor. A bloated rat carcass lies half-buried, its eyes glassy. You step over it carefully. Rats here are said to gnaw through droppings and decaying flesh alike, making them vectors for disease. Fringe tidbit: some units set rat traps filled with bacon only to find officers confiscating the catch for their breakfasts. Historians still argue whether the bacon was ever truly cooked. Your stomach twists at the thought of eating officer-provided pork fat while the trenches reek of rot. You steady yourself against the timber, breathing through your mouth to avoid the rancid odors seeping from the boards. You can't help but wonder, did someone die here months ago? Their bones still buried just beneath the surface. Suddenly, a high-pitched chirr interrupts your reverie. A wounded sparrow trapped in the trench roof. You cup your hand, gently nudging the terrified bird down before it flutters crazily against the wooden beams. You open a fist and it darts off into a corner, skidding behind a crate of unused grenades. You exhale with relief, grateful for a moment of innocent life amid the grime. Historians still argue whether wildlife in the trenches, sparrows, songbirds, even curious foxes, provided genuine morale boosts or merely underscored how far removal from home life you'd gone. You run a hand through your hair, brushing aside matted mud, and force yourself to focus. Survival depends on staying alert to every squeak and scurry. You crouch low and peer into the narrow trench tunnel beyond. The rat you saw earlier is gone, likely back to its lair in the support trench. You trace the path with your eyes. Duckboards warp into darkness. Broken timber stitches, the trench walls and overhead, corrugated steel sheets, form a shaky roof that could collapse under a heavy shell. You flick your gaze upward. Lice cling in clusters to the underside of the steel, hidden from plain sight, until they drop onto the back of your neck. You grit your teeth and shake it off. Joke 3. The only snow you're guaranteed in these trenches is the cascade of lice dropping from above. You reach behind you for a piece of sandpaper you've kept since your last spit and polish inspection. You rub it between your fingers, hoping the abrasive texture might dislodge some of the clingy parasites. It helps a little until a fresh barrage begins, shell fragments pinging overhead like raindrops on a tin roof. Your hand flies to your helmet as you whisper a quick prayer. Few soldiers are explicitly religious here. But when steel rains down, you call out to whatever you believe will listen. Then you remember in the chaos, rats and lice. Don't care what deity you invoke. You rise, resolved to harden. This trench may be infested, but it's your home until they pull you out. You steel yourself for the next barrage. Knowing both vermin and shells will test your nerves in equal measure. You rub at a lice bite, grit your teeth, and prepare to move on, determined that neither rat, nor bug, nor bullet will break you. You clamber over a twisted length of barbed wire and drop into a knee-deep pool of fetid water, the cold biting through canvas and wool, to remind you that comfort is a myth here. This sector's trench walls have collapsed under constant rain and shell fire, leaving only waterlogged walls held aloft by rotting timber and rusted corrugated steel. You probably won't survive this without accepting that a dry moment is a luxury you've forgotten. Mainstream fact, proper trench drainage was nearly impossible to maintain under sustained bombardment, and many frontline trenches became quagmires indistinguishable from swamps. Fringe tidbit, some units attempted to line their walls with old railway sleepers in hopes of shoring up the earth, only to find each sleeper acted like a sponge, absorbing water until it split in half. Historians still argue whether wooden reinforcements ever saved more lives than they cost by collapsing unpredictably. You balance on a submerged duckboard, feeling it creak ominously under your weight. Below the murky surface, you sense twisted metal and shattered wood waiting to snag your boot. The water is thick with mud and the remnants of previous occupants, broken sandbags, spent artillery shells, and the occasional glint of a forgotten helmet. You hold your breath, wincing as something brushes your calf, convincing yourself it's just a stray twig. Your voice echoes faintly as you call out to a comrade deeper in the trench, but the reply is lost in the drip-drip of water through a punctured steel plate. You crane your neck to inspect the ceiling. The corrugated iron is bowed inward, saturated and heavy, sagging, as though it will give way at any moment. Joke 1. You've heard of wet dreams, but down here, every dream is soaked. You press your back into the trench wall to steady yourself and notice a small inrush of water from a fissure, where a shell crater above leaks rainwater straight into your space. Patches of straw and burlap, meant to divert the flow, are shredded, hanging limp like wet rags. You cup your hands beneath the trickle and sip water tastes faintly of iron and decay, but you welcome the moisture. Mainstream fact soldiers in some sectors dug deep sump pits beneath duckboards to collect runoff, but these filled almost as fast as they could bail them out. Fringe tidbit, a few inventive men tried using overturned metal buckets as personal toilets, thinking the design might reduce trench muck, but the contents often sloshed back when a shell rocked the line. Historians still argue whether any ad hoc sewage solutions actually improved sanitation or just relocated the stench. You glance down at your trousers, now soaked through to the skin, and shiver violently. Hypothermia wasn't just a winter concern. Many men suffered trench foot, an agonizing condition caused by prolonged exposure to wet and cold. Mainstream fact, by 1917 medical officers reported trench foot in up to 75% of men in some divisions, leading to mass evacuations. Fringe tidbit, some soldiers believed wrapping feet in whale oil before donning boots offered protection, although the smell made trench neighbors believe you'd taken on a marine life form. Historians still argue whether any topical treatments were as effective as simply changing socks. You strip off one boot and peel back molded socks, revealing skin white as bone with patches of dark wrinkled flesh. The pain is immediate. You gasp and slap your foot against a wooden plank before returning it to the soggy boot. You wrap your sock more tightly even though you know it's likely too late. Joke 2. You're starting to think the only thing milder than this water is the rum ration. A crack echoes down the trench as a nearby support board fractures under the water's weight. You brace both hands against the wall, the soaked timber splintering beneath your fingers. You take a step back too late and feel the plank shift. Water gushes through a gap in the wall, rising toward your waist. Instinctively, you hop onto the duckboard, praying it holds. Above you, the shell-torn roof shutters rattle, and fresh rain pelts down through every hole it can find. You think about the luxury of a roof that keeps you dry. Mainstream fact many frontline trenches use: improvised roofing, corrugated iron wooden beams, or even canvas, but all failed under heavy shelling or storms. Fringe, Tidbit, one platoon, painted their canvas roofs white to reflect sunlight, but discovered it also reflected enemy observation planes, making them a prime target. Historians still argue whether any roof design ever truly improved living conditions. You raise your head to watch droplets coalesce and drip onto your helmet, each one echoing like a tiny bell toll for your sanity. Below the water level, inches higher, and you realize your only choice is to move forward or drown in ankle-deep filth. You swallow hard and forge ahead, splashing through the murk. Your trench buddy stands ankle-deep, near a collapsed section, topping up a nail-studded sandbag to shore up a leak. He looks up and offers a crooked grin that doesn't reach his eyes, then turns back to his futile work. He'd rather lash sandbags than talk. You can't blame him. Joke 3. At this point, you'd welcome even the enemy anything for a dry spot. You shuffle onward, ducking under a slanted support beam half submerged in water. The beam bears the faded stencil of a previous regiment 12th Fusiliers you read, then wonder where those men are now. Likely buried somewhere in the mire, unable to escape even in death. Ahead, you see the faint glow of a lantern in the distance, the sign of a dugout where officers and runners huddle out of the worst of the damp. You quicken your pace, each step memorable in its resistance. The lantern's halo bobs as you approach, and you push through the narrow entrance into relative warmth, almost blissfully dry earth beneath wooden floorboards. Inside, a corporal hands out cups of hot tea, a miracle in this forsaken place. You clasp the tin mug, inhaling the bitter steam, and let the warmth seep into your bones. You close your eyes, savoring the ordinary luxury. Mainstream fact supply lines strove to deliver fresh tea to frontline troops, believing it boosted morale and circulation. Fringe tidbit: some men diluted tea with nearby ditch water when supplies ran low, calling it broth of the damned. Historians still argue whether tea or rum was the greater morale booster. You cradle the mug between cold hands, then take a cautious sip. The bittersweet liquid slides down your throat, reminding you that even a small kindness can feel like salvation. You glance around at your soaked comrades' unused cups, placed on sandy ledges, faces lit by the soft glow. For a moment, the war recedes, replaced by the comforting ritual of tea. Then you hear the whistle again. It's time to return to the front. You drain your mug pop, open your helmet, and step back into the embracing cold. The lantern's light fades behind you. The trench swallows you once more. You set your jaw and trudge forward, boots squelching hard, warmed by the memory of dry ground. You remind yourself, survive this day, and maybe, just maybe, you'll taste tea again tomorrow. The air trembles with a low-frequency roar as the artillery barrage begins again, each distant boom rolling through the trench like an earthquake you can't escape. You dive flat against the muddy floor helmet, pressed into wooden boards, trying to make yourself as small as possible. Even though thin timber offers about as much protection as a soggy napkin, shell shock's echo isn't just a phrase here. It's a living, breathing terror that rattles every bone in your body. Mainstream fact, by the end of WWI, over 80,000 British soldiers had been diagnosed with shell shock, a term encompassing physical brain injury and psychological trauma from relentless bombardment. Fringe tidbit: one misguided unit tried teaching soldiers to whistle a tune during barrages, believing rhythmic breathing could sonically armor them, though most men stopped whistling after the first near miss. Historians still argue whether shell shock was primarily a neurological condition or a purely psychological one. You clamp your hands over your ears as the ground shudders. The smell of burnt cordite and ozone fills your nostrils, making your eyes water even when you force them to shut. Each explosion sends tiny splinters of wood and flecks of brick raining down, pinging off your helmet with maddening regularity. Joke 1. It's the world's worst percussion section, and nobody asked you to join. Your heartbeat hammers in your throat. You fight the urge to bolt, but adrenaline locks your legs in place. You've learned that movement during a barrage only increases your odds of stumbling into something worse: a collapsed wall, a hidden shell crater, or a panicked comrade barreling into you. So you stay down, chest heaving, mind screaming to run. The trench walls tremble, and for a moment you lose track of where your body ends and the earth begins. Your boots, once separate objects, feel welded to the mud beneath you. You pray silently to whatever deity is listening or to the universe at large in hopes of postponing the next shell's arrival. Historians still argue whether rotations off the front line did more to prevent shell shock or simply delayed the inevitable collapse of a soldier's nerves. Fringe tidbit: some regiments issued stiffening syrups laced with bromide to calm men's nerves, though the side effects included blurry vision and what they called zombie marches. A thunderous crack jolts you upright and you flinch at the sight of a spent shell casing tumbling into the trench beside you. Steam rolls off its hot surface, hissing as it hits the cold mud. You reach for it, curiosity mixing with dread, and turn it over in your gloved hand, its brass scarred edges jagged. You imagine that casing speeding overhead just moments ago, screaming like a banshee before crashing here. Joke 2. You never thought you'd hold one of these like some grim, twisted party favor. You glance at a nearby stretcher litter piled against the wall, blanketed forms, eerily still. Medics move among them with somber efficiency, checking pulses, applying bandages, and whispering a bleak version of musical chairs onto the next. You recall that over 1.5 million men were wounded on the Western Front in 1916 alone, and many of them carried wounds they'd never truly recover from. Mainstream fact: the Battle of the Somme alone produced over 1 million casualties, making it one of the bloodiest engagements in history. Fringe tidbit: one regimental chaplain noted that after weeks of bombardment, men spoke of hearing phantom guns even in quiet moments, convinced the war would follow them home. Historians still argue whether immersive training before deployment could have reduced the incidence of shell shock. You press your cheek to the damp wood, focusing on the rapid rhythm of shell bursts. It's almost musical in its predictability, yet every strike feels like it might be the one to split your skull. You taste grit and fear in your mouth, yet you swallow and prepare for the next impact. Suddenly, you see a messenger runner darting through a side tunnel, body hunched as if trying to disappear. He nearly collides with you, panting out orders: hold here until barrage lifts, then send 2 men down to repair the communication line. You nod wordlessly and give chase after him, boots slapping wet boards. You reach a shattered phone line, hanging by a single wire. Sparks crackle at the torn ends. You kneel, fingers trembling, and splice together wires with a pair of battered pliers. Your ears ring and you swear the vibration of the shells is traveling up your arms. In a calm voice, you don't feel you call through the line's static, but it holds. You've restored contact. Joke 3. Congrats, you just performed open heart surgery on a telephone. You sit back on your heels, adrenaline still racing. The runner pats your shoulder before disappearing into the gloom. You chill with pride until the next explosion rattles the trench, and you're reminded that pride here is fleeting. You take a shaky breath and gather your gear, wiping sweat and mud from your brow. The barrage enters its final phase, a rapid-fire crescendo, before the deep hollow rumble fades away. As suddenly as it begins, you sense the tension drop the air, going still in that surreal moment when the world seems to hold its breath. Mainstream fact combat fatigue reached its peak during 1917, with many armies instituting rest periods after heavy barrages. Fringe tidbit: some men claimed to experience synesthetic reactions during barrages, seeing flashes of color with each detonation, as if the war were painting the trenches in hellish neon. Historians still argue whether these sensory distortions were hallucinatory or neurological deficits. You wipe your face and rise unsteadily to your feet. The walls around you bear fresh gouges and splintered wood, revealing a dark earth behind. The trench that sheltered you moments ago feels violated, like a battered fortress collapsed under siege. You step over a fallen beam to the trench mouth, peering out into the battered landscape. Silence has returned, save for distant moans and the drip of water. The once crimson dawn has turned to a sickly yellow from lingering smoke. You swallow hard, feeling the weight of every lost comrade pressing on your chest. You take out your notebook and scribble a quick entry. Day 18 survived another barrage. Heart still beating minds not far behind. You close it, fingers stained with charcoal and mud. You take a deep breath, letting the acrid air fill your lungs. You know this fleeting calm won't last. Sooner or later, another barrage will roll in, and you'll be back on the floor wondering how you ever thought you'd survive this. Yet, right now, you stand. You breathe. You tighten your grip on your rifle, resolved to harden. Shell shock may echo in your bones, but you're determined that it won't silence you. You lift your chin, ready to face whatever the trench or the war throws next. You crouch low behind the parapet, pulse hammering as orders crack through the trench. Over the top, you hoist your rifle and swing your leg over the muddy lip, bracing yourself for the deafening gasp of no man's land. You probably won't survive this charge unless you steel your nerves against fear and cold reality. A trumpet call echoes and you launch yourself onto the scorched earth boots, splashing through shell craters filled with stinking water. Mainstream fact: during major offensives, units often charged en masse, with attack waves comprising up to 100 men each, resulting in staggering initial losses. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers carried small lucky tokens, rabbit feet or scrap metal charms, tucked into tunic seams, convinced they'd turn bullets aside. Historians still argue whether these talismans offered genuine comfort or merely heightened superstition. You sprint forward, rifle clutch tight, bayonet gleaming ominously. The first few yards blur as machine gun fire rakes the soft ground bullets, kicking up mud around you like angry wasps. You whip your head left-right trying to find cover, but seeing only shattered earth and twisted wire. You swallow hard, deja vu hitting as you remember your nightmares. Joke 1. It's the only time you'll run headfirst into bullets, and call it exercise. Your boots pound across a field of churned soil, each step heavier than the last. You spot a shallow crater up ahead and dive in mud, spraying across your gear. You roll, coming up in a crouch, heart in your throat. The trench you left glimmers in the morning haze, so close, yet you know retreat isn't an option. A crack of a whippet tank's engine stirs behind you, a rare sight. meant to clear wire and pillboxes. You hear curses, some call it the tin can, others the iron beast. Fringe tidbit: one crew painted cartoon faces on their tank's front, hoping to spook enemy gunners into thinking it was haunted. Historians still argue whether these early tanks were worth the mechanical failures and crew casualties they caused. You clamber out of the crater, adrenaline surging as you charge toward a damaged German strongpoint. You lob a grenade, ducking as it arcs high and lands with a muted thud. You cover your ears, the explosion barely registers above the cacophony of gunfire, but when it does, debris rains down. You glimpse a handful of enemy rifles falling silent and feel a blink of triumph. Joke 2. It's like popping confetti if confetti shredded your jacket and stained you with rust. You scramble forward, crawling under barbed wire previously impassable from the trench. Each coil is a steel serpent. You twist and shimmy, gloves snagged and torn. You curse the engineers who laid this obstacle and envy those French pioneers who whispered legends of wire-cutting drills. Though you suspect those drills were as mythical as unicorns, historians still argue whether pre-attack wire-cutting operations significantly increased success rates or simply alerted the enemy to pending assaults. Fringe tidbit: some officers lowered silent saws on ropes to cut the wire at night, only to have the noise amplified by the trench acoustics. You press on chest heaving until you reach a house of broken bricks, the remains of a farmhouse turned adverse command post. You pour through windowsills and corridors, clearing rooms with frantic precision. You sweep your bayonet, heart racing as you clear every corner. Mainstream fact: small assault teams called stormtroopers pioneered infiltration tactics, bypassing strong points to disrupt trenches' rear areas. Fringe tidbit: some stormtroopers carried pigeons in their packs, releasing them in captured enemy nests to send triumphant messages home. If the birds weren't shot down en route, historians still argue whether stormtrooper tactics were decisive or only marginally more effective than mass waves. You crouch behind a shattered wall, panting as the farmhouse's strategic view gives you a moment of clarity. The wounded and the dead lie interspersed with burning timbers and twisted wire, the tableau of a world gone mad. You swallow a dry gulp of water, tasting grit and adrenaline. Joke 3. You're getting your steps in, just not the kind tracked by any pedometer. You pop a fresh clip into your rifle and scan the horizon. Guns have fallen silent here. The enemy has retreated or been driven off. You step out of cover boots, squishing on mortar debris, and look back at the trench lip you conquered. You feel hollow pride and hollow dread, knowing you've won ground but lost something deeper. You roll up your sleeve and check your watch, its face-cracked hand, frozen at the moment you crept over. You reset your jaw, acknowledging the moment but refusing to let it define you. You stand tall, rifle at ease, as reinforcements trickle across the broken sod. You inhale the cold morning air, the acrid smell of cordite still hanging. You realize this battlefield, once surreal, has become your reality. You straighten, adjust your helmet, and prepare for orders forward again or consolidation. You might survive this trench charge, but you know survival here is measured by inches and seconds. You take a final look at the smoldering ruin and step forward, ready to carve out another foothold in this hellscape. You pick your way across the cratered battlefield, each step a gamble, as you skirt the edges of gaping holes filled with sludge and lifeless water. The ground heaves beneath your boots like a frozen sea, every crater a reminder of relentless shelling. You probably won't survive this stretch without keeping your eyes peeled and your balance razor sharp. Mainstream fact: in the UE salient alone, shelling created over 40,000 craters per square mile. By 1917, turning fields into lunar landscapes. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers used makeshift stilts made from empty shell casings lashed together to stride across smaller craters. though they often tipped over, earning the moniker brass stilts of folly. Historians still argue whether such contrivances ever saved more time than they wasted in embarrassing tumbles. Ahead, a cluster of craters forms a twisted maze, their rims jagged with torn earth and splintered wood. You lean forward, scanning for hidden tripwires and booby traps. A single misstep could send you spiraling into a deep hole or setting off a delayed action shell. You taste the dust on your lips, the air heavy with pulverized rock and cordite. Joke 1. It's like navigating a children's ball pit if the balls were replaced by rusty nails and explosive surprises. You slip into a shallow depression and crouch behind its lip, breathing through your mouth to avoid inhaling grit. The hushed groans of wounded men echo from distant dugouts, muffled by intervening ridges. You glance up at a shattered tree stump, its branches blown into grotesque spikes. In its shadow, you find a tattered cap half buried in clay. You pick it up and recognize the regimental badge of a unit thought wiped out weeks ago. A chill licks your spine. Mainstream fact, entire battalions at Ypres were sometimes reduced to mere dozens of men, losing over 80% of their strength in single engagements. Fringe tidbit, some companies kept death lists tallying comrades lost to specific shell bursts, noting the time crater size and even the supposed mood of the incoming fire. Historians still argue whether recording such morbid statistics helped soldiers process trauma or deepen their despair. You shudder and tuck the cap into your jacket, using it as a grim talisman. You rise and edge forward boots, slipping on the slick clay. Water sloshes in nearby craters, reflecting a sky marbled with smoke. A lone gull wheels overhead, indifferent to the human carnage below. The landscape is surreal. One moment you stumble over a barbed fence entwined with roots, and the next you're stepping on a plank spanning two craters like a precarious bridge. You pause mid-stride, watching ripples spread across crater water where you disturb the surface. Beneath you, imagine drowned helmets and stockings, drifting like ghostly fish. Joke 2. You've always wanted to go fishing, but this wasn't the kind of catch you had in mind. You spot movement at the far edge of the field, a squad of engineers, laying wooden boards to form a raised path. You envy their purpose. They chip away at the mud with pickaxes, faces set in grim determination. You hold your breath as one plank sags under the weight of a cart, splintering and dumping its load into a waiting crater. The men curse their voices, swallowed by the wind. Mainstream fact trench engineers, known as sappers, often worked nights to build duckboard tracks and footbridges across crater fields. Yet these were destroyed almost as quickly as they were built. Fringe tidbit, some sappers tried waterproofing wooden walkways by coating them in tar and paraffin, but the mixture attracted lice and rats, turning the path into a vermin highway. Historians still argue whether any waterproofing method was worth the additional pest infestation. You press on, keeping low to avoid sniper fire from distant enemy posts. Every stump, every ridge looks like cover. Every crater seems to beckon. You swallow the lump in your throat and force one foot in front of the other. Your boots finagle perches on muddy ledges, your rifle held aloft like a walking stick. Your senses heighten the faint clink of metal, the whisper of wind through shattered branches and the distant staccato of machine guns. You inhale deeply the smell of wet wood and cordite, mixing with the ever-present fetid stench of decay. You taste grit again, but you grit your teeth and push forward. Suddenly, a dull thud vibrates underfoot. You freeze, heart-jarring, as you realize you've stepped on a blast crater's rim so thin it might give way. You hop back, landing thigh-deep in cold water. You pant, trying not to curse, as icy liquid seeps over your gear. Joke 3. Who knew the mud had hidden vipers? They're just less cuddly. You haul yourself out and bring water from your sleeves, forcing your focus back to the maze. You remind yourself that every crater has a purpose. Some are mere craters, some are hidden tombs, and some might shield you from enemy eyes. You consider climbing into a larger crater to catch your breath, but the steep slope looks like a death trap. Instead, you skirt its edge, mindful of loose earth. Your trenchmate staggers into view, rifle slung over his shoulder, mud streaked across his face. He offers a silent nod and points ahead, the far trench lip visible as a dark line against a lighter field. Your chest balloons at the side. You're closer than you thought. Relief surges even as dread pulses in your veins. The trench might be safer, but it's also the next gauntlet. Mainstream fact: the average assault line spanned roughly 200 yards of cratered ground from trench to trench, exposing soldiers for nearly a minute under fire. Fringe tidbit: some attackers experimented with crawling between craters to stay low, but mud-filled pits sometimes trap them, leading to drownings or painful extractions. Historians still argue whether crawling tactics ever outperformed full-speed charges. You take a deep breath and point at a shallow crater fringe, signaling your mate. Together, you sprint the last few yards, boots flinging wet earth behind you. Bullets zip overhead like angry hornets, but the crater's lips offer jagged shields. You dive into the trench-mouthed chest, heaving limbs, trembling. You roll into the damp safety of your side-of-the-line ears, ringing from the contrast of open field echoes and enclosed silence. You blink and watch toes of mud drip from your boots. Your mate claps you on the shoulder, wide-eyed, but says nothing. You exhale, shoulders slumping, and realize you've never been so grateful to be in a cramped, muddy hole. You sit up against the breastwork, rifle barreling into the darkness below. You look back across the cratered sea. You just crossed the field, pockmarked like an avalanche of boils. You shiver not from cold, but from the realization that this lunar wasteland is your new normal. You wipe your wet cheek and pocket the tattered cap you found earlier, feeling its weight. You let your eyes drift upward to the smoky sky, then close them for a moment, letting your mind detach from the horror you've just endured. You remind yourself every day you survive here is a small victory. You push yourself to your feet, boots squelching, and adjust your pack. You glance at the trench's muddy lip and wonder how long you'll have before duty calls you back over that cratered expanse. Then you step forward, ready to face whatever the trench demands next. A sudden whistle crackles overhead. Another gas alarm, and you scramble for your mask hands, slick with mud as you fumble the straps. Mustard gas drifts in across no man's land like a pale, poisonous fog, clinging to the low spots and seeping through every crevice of the trench. You probably won't survive this attack without mastering the dance of gas drills and broken respirators. You yank the mask over your face vision, narrowing to yellowed lenses smeared with grime. Mainstream fact: mustard gas, introduced in 1917, could blind soldiers within minutes and cause severe burns hours later. Fringe tidbit: some troops tried smearing raw onion or vinegar on their faces to counteract the gas's effects, though many ended up with irritated eyes and a pungent aftertaste. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies offered any real protection, or merely a fleeting sense of control. The acrid stench of sulfur fills your nostrils, making you gag even through the mask's filters. Gas canisters hiss behind you, and you hear the dull thud of shells, releasing their deadly payloads downrange. Each impact sends ripples of sickly smoke toward you, glowing in the trench's flickering lamplight like ethereal ghosts. Joke 1. It's like someone set the world's worst barbecue and you're the main course. You clamp a hand over your mask's exhale valve, hoping it holds. You edge forward under the lip lungs, burning as you inhale filtered air tainted by chemical reek. Shadows dance on the trench walls, your fellow soldiers, faces hidden moving stiffly as they secure their masks. You tap elbows in reassurance, a silent camaraderie forged in shared discomfort. A sudden cough erupts nearby, someone's mask seal failed. You whirl to see a comrade clutching his throat, the mask dangling uselessly. You lurch to help, but drill instincts kick in. Prioritize the living. You nod urgently and motion him to pull his mask tighter. Before the gas takes deeper hold, he gasps, vision blurring, then staggers back, mask reset but shaking violently. Mainstream fact: gas casualties often soared because soldiers removed masks prematurely, thinking the worst was over. Fringe tidbit: some units raced to capture enemy gas cylinders intact, hoping to repurpose them, though too many expeditions ended in accidental releases. Historians still argue whether gas warfare ever provided a strategic advantage or simply escalated the terror. You press onward, vision narrowed but focus sharpened. You feel slick beads of sweat inside the mask, stark against the damp chill of trench air. Your boots slip on the rails of a duckboard, and you steady yourself against the breastwork mud, squishing through your soul. You catch a glimmer of pale green in the gloom, gas, clinging in swirling eddies where the trench dips. Joke 2. It's like walking through a toxic laundry load, no softener involved. You inhale shallowly, conserving precious air and edge toward an improvised gas chamber dug by engineers these past weeks. This covered niche offers a brief refuge if gas pours too thickly across the line. You hoist yourself in dropping amid empty ammunition crates repurposed as seating. Others join you, hoods still down but masks held ready. You watch the gas swirl past the opening sunlight, filtering through it like stained glass, if stained glass could kill you. You swallow hard and tap your mask, checking the carbon filters. You remember training: breathe slow, exhale through the filter, never panic. Your heart pounds. The mask's slight restriction feels suffocating, turning every breath into labor. Mainstream fact: the British smallpox respirator of 1916 offered improved protection, but was cumbersome, causing many to chuck it aside during attacks. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers personalized their respirators with chalk drawings, smiley faces, or vulgar slogans, hoping humor could chase away dread. Historians still argue whether morale hinges more on equipment or esprit de corps. You shift on the crate, aching back, reminding you which bones are bruised from shell fragments. A thin beam of light slices through the gloom as a shell detonates nearby, the blast shaking the chamber. Wood creaks overhead. You bite your lip but stay still, clinging to breathing protocol. Joke 3. You're not claustrophobic unless you count breathing through a bag. The gas thins after what feels like hours, but is likely only minutes. Soldiers carefully peer out, scanning for the telltale green cloud. You follow suit, heart in throat, until someone signals that the winds shifted and the cloud receded across no man's land. You let out a shuddering breath, truly celebrate only after you remove the mask. You pull off the respirator, eyes watering and throat raw. You toss it down and gulp fresh air, tasting freedom, like the first sip of water after a desert. You wipe sweat and residue from your brow mask hanging uselessly by your side. Mainstream fact: despite its terror gas caused fewer deaths than shrapnel or bullets, around 90,000 fatalities, versus millions in other categories. Fringe tidbit: a handful of soldiers developed a twisted pride, decorating their helmets with metal bristles to ward off gas, though none reported improved outcomes. Historians still argue whether gas was more psychological warfare than tactical. You rise and step back to the trench wall's edge. The morning sun has burned the worst of the fog away, revealing the battered landscape beyond. shell craters yawn like hungry mouths, and the twisted wire glints in daylight. You inhale deeply, savoring clean air before the next barrage. You dust mud from your sleeves and adjust your pack. Your boots are heavier now, soaked from humid gas and morning dew. You catch your reflection in a tiny rivulet. Pale face, hollow eyes, mask, straps etched in your skin. You barely recognize the person staring back. In the distance, voices call for casualty parties to clear the wounded. You swallow and follow the call. There's work to be done. You step forward, breathing unencumbered air but carrying the gases sting in every cough. You duck under a low beam and make your way down the trench, ready to help, drag stretchers and clear rubble. The gas drill is over for now, but you know another cloud could roll in at any moment. Still, you push on determined that neither poison nor fear will claim you today. A pungent stench greets you even before you step into the next trench segment, a nauseating blend of excrement, decaying flesh, and stagnant water that clings to every breath. You know the real enemy here isn't just bullets or shells, but the microscopic killers lurking in mud and filth. Disease and dysentery run rampant. Without vigilance, you'll be felled faster by your own body than by enemy fire. Your boots squelch over soiled duckboards as you move toward the latrine area, a misnomer, since privacy and sanitation have long since vanished. Mainstream fact: more soldiers in WWI died from diseases like dysentery, typhus, and trench foot than from battle wounds. Fringe tidbit: some men believed eating raw onions or drinking urine could ward off dysentery, though the latter tactic often invited scorn and more illness. Historians still argue whether these folk cures ever did more harm than good. You arrive at a series of crude latrine troughs, cut into the earth, lined with wooden planks, and roped off only by a length of barbed wire. You peer inside wastewater and excrement swirl together, while flies buzz in thick clouds overhead. You grip your nose, thankful for the rain-assisted flow that at least keeps the trough from overflowing completely, though recent shelling has blocked many drains, turning latrines into shallow cesspools. A sudden gurgle from your gut reminds you of last night's rancid stew. You brace yourself, knowing the consequences of succumbing here: dehydration fever, and being tagged invalid before you can even limp away. You swallow hard, retreating to a fresher air pocket, but the acidic churn persists. Joke 1. You fought bullets, gas, and rats. Now you're on the front lines of your intestines. You rummage in your kit for tablets, iodate crystals, meant to purify water at a pinch. You toss one into your canteen. But clear water is as rare as a quiet night. Most of the supply has been diverted to medical officers treating the worst cases of trench fever. You resign yourself to drinking from a muddy puddle, hoping the crisp taste of the earth will at least settle your stomach. Mainstream fact: dysentery in WWI was often caused by contaminated water and poor latrine placement, leading to chronic dehydration among troops. Fringe tidbit: some regiments used bucket brigades to haul clean water forward, only to find the buckets repurposed as impromptu latrines when discipline broke down. Historians still argue whether centralized water distribution would have significantly reduced disease outbreaks. Your stomach spasms and you search for a sheltered spot beyond the trench line. You find a shallow sap, but it's barely higher ground. You grip the wood supports and brace yourself. A bout of frenetic retching follows saltwater-tasting bile mixed with mud. You close your eyes, cheeks burning with shame and relief. Historians still argue whether open-air trenches or covered dugouts produced higher rates of illness, given ventilation differences. Fringe tidbit: British troops nicknamed one particularly foul stretch Fester Alley. and claimed no man could traverse it twice without falling ill. You wonder if the rumor kept anyone away, or if it simply forced more men into alternative, equally contaminated routes. Your hands tremble as you rinse your mouth with tepid water, swallowing more stale moisture than you'd like. You pat your jacket pocket and find a half-used bar of soap, a priceless treasure. You lather your hands mechanically, scrubbing under fingernails, stained black by mud. Each wash feels like a brief triumph over disease. But you know germs hide deep in seams and fabric folds. Joke 2. You discover the true luxury wasn't wealth or victory. It was hot water and a clean sink. You move on, clutching your canteen. Ahead, you glimpse stretcher-bearers ferrying a shell-shocked man toward the dressing station. They avoid crossing near the latrine zone, careful not to brush the patient against contaminated walls. You catch a flash of empathy. Everyone here is vulnerable, whether to bullets or bacteria. Suddenly, a comrade staggers toward you, sweat damp and eyes wild. Medic, he gasps, clutching his side. You steady him, realizing his skin feels clammy and his breathing rapid, classic signs of trench fever. You guide him to a nearby dugout where the company's medical orderlies work. By lantern light, inside, the medic checks a small glass vial of serum unrefrigerated. It's already past its prime. He injects the soldier anyway, muttering, "Better than nada." You offer your canteen. No one refuses water in these moments. The fellow soldier grips the cup with gratitude, and you nod in reassurance. Mainstream fact: trench fever spread by lice caused high fevers, severe headaches, and muscle pain, often incapacitating men for weeks. Fringe tidbit: some units used guinea pigs as early warning indicators, watching for signs of illness in the animals before treating human cases. Historians still argue whether these experiments ever yielded reliable predictive value. You linger, helping tidy bandages and passing out tea to patients. You taste the weak brew, remembering Section 4 and its brief warmth. You reflect on how small comforts, tea, a spare blanket, a clean bandage, could restore morale more effectively than fresh rations. Joke 3. You're starting to think the real power lies in hot drinks, not hot lead. You step outside as the wind shifts, carrying a hint of cordite instead of excrement. You swallow and tuck your canteen away, hoisting your rifle. Your belly still protests, but you'll need strength for the next duty. You take a slow breath, scanning the trench walls for signs of structural collapse or flooding. Any additional hazard is unwelcome. You straighten shoulders, squared. Disease may lurk in every puddle and seam, but you're determined not to be its next victim. You force your feet forward, minding each step on the muddy planks. You remind yourself that sanitation is survival here as much as marksmanship. You glance at the sky, a patch of pale blue, peeking through smoke and clouds, and let yourself hope briefly that you'll see clean daylight again. Then you descend deeper back into the trench, ready to face whatever filth or fire comes next. Your boots thud against the duckboards as you approach the cookhouse entrance, nostrils twitching at the mingled scents of metal grease, oily stew, and something suspiciously sweet. Rations and rum are the currency of survival here. Without them, you'd be as good as sunk in these trenches. You probably won't make it through the week without mastering the art of trading up and improvising desperate recipes. You step inside the cramped cookhouse, a warped wooden hut, patched with corrugated iron. Inside, a corporal ladles a thick, grayish stew from a massive kettle into dented tin bowls. Beside him, a private carefully measures out dark rum from a damp wooden barrel. Each man entitled to a tot once stew is served. Mainstream fact: daily rations for an infantryman typically included 1 lb of meat, 1 lb of bread, and a half pint of rum, though supply issues often reduce these amounts. Fringe tidbit: in some sectors, cooks experimented with adding condensed milk to stew, creating what they call trench custard, a concoction that smelled like progress but tasted like rubber. Historians still argue whether field expedients like these boosted morale or just caused extra stomach cramps. You shuffle forward, bowl in hand, and peer into the stew, chunks of beef unrecognizable beneath a murky broth, dotted with unidentifiable root bits. You swallow hard, recalling that during the Somme offensive supply lines buckled so badly that soldiers sometimes went 48 hours without hot food. Joke 1. It's the only culinary experience where you pray to God for less grit. You step aside to receive your rum ration. The private hands over a chipped mug, and you lift the liquid to your lips. The burn is immediate, a sweet fire racing down your throat that somehow warms your belly more than the stew ever could. You close your eyes, savoring that fierce warmth, imagining yourself beside a roaring hearth rather than knee-deep in mud. Fringe tidbit: some units fortified their rum with leftover coffee or tea leaves when hoarded stores ran low, dubbing it liquid alertness. Historians still argue whether caffeinated spirits improved watchfulness or just produced jittery drunks. You stir your stew with a spoon warped from too many battles, trying to redistribute the meat. You bite down on a tough chunk teeth, scraping against a piston's worth of gristle. You chew thoughtfully, aware that any nourishment is better than nothing. You glance at a comrade's bowl, noting a floating sliver of what looks like tin, probably from the kettle's lining. Mainstream fact: metal shards from makeshift field cookware sometimes appeared in rations, leading to impromptu dental surgeries or lucky shrapnel souvenirs. Fringe tidbit: one cook claimed that soaking stew kettles in vinegar for days dissolved most rust and bits of tin, though soldiers who braved vinegar stew reported eye-watering flavors. Historians still argue whether vinegar cures improved health or simply adds insult to injury. You raise your mug in a silent toast and sip again. Rum, despite its hazards, is a lifeline. The burn fades to a pleasant glow that spreads through your limbs. You notice a faint smile tug at your lips as a fellow Tommy retells a ridiculous recipe. Tonight's special is rum-marinated bully beef. By dawn, it'll taste like anything but bully beef. Joke 2. When the beef fights back, you know it's done right. A sudden rumble rattles the stove, reminding you that the front world presses in even here. You swallow another mouthful of stew, willing the sinuses burning liquid to settle into your gut. It trickles down in waves of heat that soothe the constant chill. Your gaze drifts to a stack of ammunition boxes repurposed as tables, each emblazoned with stenciled regimental numbers. Someone slides a loaf of bread across 2 slices per man. The bread is stale, dense, and crumbly, perfect for sopping up every last drop of stew. You press it to your lips and chew, focusing on texture rather than taste. Mainstream fact: bread rations were the first to run low in any offensive, often replaced with hardtack biscuits that snapped like wood. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers crushed hardtack into crumbs, mixed it with jam, and called it soldier's cake, a treat that rarely fooled anyone's sweet tooth. Historians still argue whether such improvised desserts actually improved morale or just highlighted supply failures. You chuckle softly at the absurdity, then gulp the last of your rum. You feel a buzz behind your eyes, the world softening at the edges. You pop your helmet back on and stand, bowl empty, mug drained, feeling oddly fortified against the day's challenges. Joke 3. It's the first and only Michelin star kitchen where Michelin starred means you're lucky if you eat. You move to the exit, passing a makeshift black market stall, candles, soap, and personal letters, all traded for extra rations or tobacco. You spot a pilfered tin of corned beef for 2 extra slices of bread. You consider bartering your spoon for it. This stew's texture has turned you into a utensil connoisseur. You step back into the trench, the cold air hitting you like a bucket of rain. Your belly sloshes with stew and rum. You rock slightly to settle the contents. You pat your jacket pocket to confirm your tobacco pouch remains safe. Beyond food and drink the chance. For a quiet smoke is its luxury. Mainstream fact tobacco rations were standardized at around 2 Aus per week, though some soldiers received more from Red Cross parcels. Fringe tidbit: certain regiments rolled cigarettes with pages torn from discarded letters to save precious paper, a practice soldiers called silent mail. Historians still argue whether black market smoke boosted morale or fueled disciplinary issues. You take out a rag and wipe your mouth, tasting a hint of grime mixed with rum. You pinch your cheeks to feel alive. Rum-induced warmth fades quickly, and soon your stomach will gnaw again. But for now, you're fueled. You trudge onward, bowl and mug carefully stowed, mind alert to the next threat, be it shellfire gas or simply more trench muck. You remind yourself that a full belly and a warm buzz can steady your nerves as much as any rifle or helmet. You glance at the horizon expecting the usual gray. But today, after stew and rum, it almost looks promising. You inhale deeply the tang of cordite, overshadowed by an aftertaste of spiced rum. You square your shoulders and march on. You sink onto a damp duckboard ledge, rifling through your breast pocket for a creased envelope that feels like a lifeline. Letters and longing intertwine here, each word from home a fragile raft in this mire of mud and misery. You probably won't survive the trench without holding on to hope. And these scribbled pages are your anchor. Your fingers tremble as you peel open the flap and unfold the paper ink smudged by moisture and handling. Mainstream fact: by 1916, an average British soldier received around 3 letters and 6 postcards weekly, though delays meant you often read news weeks old. Fringe tidbit: some troops hoarded official gazettes for weeks, clipping out mentions of promotions and births. Rumors said some even staged mock weddings based on gazette notices. Historians still argue whether mail boosts outweighed the cruel disappointment of delayed or censored news. You clear your throat and read aloud in a hushed whisper, drawing curious glances from comrades. The letter is from your sister, her handwriting neat and looping a stark contrast to your mud-caked scrawl. She describes spring flowers blooming in your mother's garden, the scent of lavender drifting into her window. You close your eyes, savoring that imagined fragrance. Joke 1. It's the only time you'll envy weeds more than bullets. You trace a line of text where she worries about your health, begging you to write often and not do anything silly. You tap a finger on the paper's crease, imagining her voice, soft, insistent, full of love. Ahead, a rat scuttles across the trench floor, dragging a scrap of paper. You shoo it away, crumpling the image of it in your mind, out of sight, out of mind. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers slip photos of loved ones into envelopes during mail call only to have them accidentally sent back in error, creating confusion and heartbreak. Historians still argue whether military postal services were more a comfort or a source of cruel irony. Mainstream fact: postal censorship meant letters were often delayed or redacted, leaving families ignorant or misinformed about frontline realities. You swallow, voice-catching, as you read the closing lines: I dream of walking with you again by the riverbank. Your chest tightens, and you tuck the letter into your tunic close to your heart. The act feels sacred, as if you've sealed her warmth into your uniform. Outside, a messenger runner trots past, helmet tilted and gas mask dangling. You rise, slipping the letter into your pack and patting the spot like a ritual. You know he carries news of orders and reinforcements, but you cling to the thought that he might bring news from home next. Joke 2. You never thought you'd guard a letter harder than your rifle. You lean back, feet propped on a sandbag, and pull out your pencil-smeared notebook. You scratch a quick response. Thanks for the flowers, promise not to pick barbed wire in your name. Send chocolate if you can. You pause, realizing chocolate doesn't survive the journey. So instead, you write, I miss you every dawn. Mainstream fact care packages from home, often containing chocolate, cigarettes, and soap, were prize morale boosters, though many perished en route or were confiscated. Fringe tidbit: some enterprising soldiers boiled down chocolate parcels to make a murky paste they spread on bread, dubbing it trench Nutella. Historians still argue whether care parcels' psychological lift justified their logistical burden. You tuck your draft into an empty ration tin, sealing it with a scrap of tape. You smile at its ingenuity, half delivery method, half time capsule. You imagine your sister opening the tin months from now, finding your words and tin fragments as relics of survival. A sudden pop and nearby whistle break your reverie, a sniper's bullet piercing the air. You whip around, heart pounding. The letter falls from your pack, drifting between duckboards. You snatch it up reflexively, skimming the back for any damage. It's intact. You press it to your lips. Joke 3. It's the only kiss you'll receive today that doesn't stain your cheek with mud. You rise, tucking notebook and letter away, and shoulder your rifle. You spot 2 officers calling for letter runners, men assigned to transport mail between battalion HQ and the front line. You think about volunteering, feeling the pull of duty and desire. But then you recall that runners have one of the highest attrition rates, over 50% in some sectors. Historians still argue whether the morale boost of frontline mail was worth risking so many lives. Fringe tidbit: some units use carrier pigeons instead of human runners, but pigeons sometimes got lost or were shot down. You shake your head, deciding to stick with shooting straight rather than delivering love straight. You check your magazine and tighten your pack straps. Ahead, the trench tunnels deeper into darkness, leading toward tonight's listening post. You step off the duckboards, careful not to slip boots, landing solidly on packed earth. You pause at the tunnel entrance, flipping up your helmet's chin strap and dipping your chin into your collar. You draw a deep breath, the letters send faint against the sharper odors of cordite and earth. You steel yourself words from home, or the roar of battle, both remind you why you endure. You duck under a low beam and emerge into a cramped dugout, lit by a single flickering lamp. A corporal hands you your next assignment: guide a patrol to inspect an abandoned enemy trench segment. You nod, gripping the letter in your pocket as a talisman. You step forward into the narrow gallery, rifle ready and senses alert. Each creaking support post and dripping water drop echoes in the tunnel. You can feel the weight of your letter at your side, a private promise of hope amid public horror. As you move deeper, you whisper to yourself, carry on, carry forward, carry this letter safe. The trench wind whips through, and you brace for what lies ahead. Enemy men, collapsed passages, or sudden orders. But before you vanish into the earth, you linger on one thought. No matter what this war throws at you, those words from home will always find you. You slip into the corduroy hush of midnight, the trench transformed into a yawning tunnel of shadows. Orders whisper through the line: a small party must raid the enemy's listening post under cover of darkness. You steal your breath. You probably won't survive this nocturnal foray without nerves of steel and stealthy feet. You edge forward, rifle at the ready, senses straining. Mainstream fact: nighttime raids were conducted frequently to gather intelligence, with some battalions averaging 2 raids per week. Fringe tidbit: certain daring soldiers coated their boots in fresh lime churned from nearby pits, believing the caustic powder would burn any keen-eyed patrol dogs. Historians still argue whether such homegrown traps ever disrupted enemy sentries or simply burned your souls. The trench walls loom close in the weak glow of a single flickering magnesium flare overhead. Every drip of water echoes like a ticking clock. You swallow, taste the tang of earth mixed with sweat, and press your cheek against the cold wood to steady yourself. A stray rat darts past, pausing to sniff before darting into darkness. You pause, too heart-hammering, then press on. Joke 1. It's the only time you'll search for trouble and hope it smells like cordite. Your patrol leader signals a halt. You crouch in a shallow dugout, faces etched by lamplight. Masks stowed, and you exchange tense nods. A runner slips out, scaling the duckboards and disappearing into the night. Moments later, distant German chatter drifts through the wire-tangled air. You tighten your grip on your bayonet, anticipation sharpening every nerve. Fringe tidbit: some raiders wore homemade soft boots, crafted from cut-up leggings, to muffle their steps, though many found the fabric gave way after a few yards, leaving them in socks on frozen clay. Historians still argue whether specialized footwear ever truly reduced noise or just created blistered feet. The leader raises a gloved hand and your party slips over the lip. Silence swallows you instantly. You drop into no man's land boots, touching sodden earth, and move in single file toward the faint glow of the enemy listening post. You swallow again, tasting grit and fear on your tongue. Joke 2. It's like sneaking out of your parents' house, but if your parents carried rifles and shouted in German. Ahead, you see two sentries pacing before a low mound of sandbags. Their MP40 flashes red in the flare light. You pause in a shallow crater's lip, binoculars cast aside. The leader signals and then you dash. Your boots slap the ground, mud flinging. The sentries whirl surprise, slicing the air. Before they can scream, you're on them, a handful of muffled grunts, quick restraints with wire and tape. You yank the tape tight and shove a gag into one sentry's mouth. His eyes widen, reflecting panic and confusion. You shove him behind the sandbags, heart pounding. The leader retrieves a small map from your pack sketched by intelligence officers and you compare it to the terrain. Every notch and barbed wire coil matches. Mainstream fact trench raids often captured enemy documents and prisoners, providing crucial information on planned offensives and wire layouts. Fringe tidbit: some raiding parties carried luxury items, cigars or brandy to bribe nervous prisoners into talking. Historians still argue whether such bribes yielded reliable intel or just got you intoxicated captives. You slip past the mound, crouching low. You break into a shallow enemy sap, its walls slick with condensation. Your flashlight flickers, must conserve batteries, so you press on by memory. The stale smell of sweat and the stink of cheap soap hits you. You lick a finger and taste bitter detergent residue. Joke 3. The worst thing about home invasion is you can't call the landlord he's armed too. You reach a small dugout entrance, marked with a crude chalk swastika. The leader signals to stack here. A runner from the enemy side approaches, likely a patrol, checking the wire. You freeze as he glides past, only inches away. Your breath catches. When he disappears, you exhale so sharply that your mask whistles. Inside the dugout, you find a wooden crate, marked Nachrichten Depot, and pry it open. Inside are folded papers, some bearing coded messages and cipher keys. Your heart leaps. You stuff them into your tunic pocket, careful not to crinkle the fragile sheets. Mainstream fact cipher keys captured during raids help Allied codebreakers intercept and decipher German communications. Fringe tidbit: desperate units once tried writing messages in Morse code with excrement patterns on bread crusts, though decoding that was a different kind of nightmare. Historians still argue whether unconventional methods ever hindered or helped secure transmissions. You whisper to the leader, "Mission accomplished." He nods, and you begin retracing your path. Footsteps light on boards damp with dew. You pass the gagged sentries. One gives you a venomous glare, the other gags muffled pleas. You ignore them, focusing on each duckboard and plank. The whistle of a shell overhead makes your pulse spike. You press flat mud, spraying your cheek as ordnance bursts harmlessly beyond. You glimpse the trench lip ahead home. You move faster, muscles screaming. You climb over the parapet and tumble back into your trench. Comrades gather around as you produce the stolen documents. Their eyes widen. A wave of relieved murmurs ripples through the cramped space. You pass the papers to HQ runner, and he melts into the darkness. You collapse onto a sandbag chest, heaving, adrenaline still blazing. You taste victory bitter like the cold steel of your bayonet. But you smile, knowing this midnight gamble may save dozens of lives tomorrow. You press a hand to your forehead, trying to calm your thudding pulse. The thin moonlight filters through broken planks above. You lean back and exhale, letting the tension drain. Mainstream fact successful raids boosted morale significantly even when casualties were high. Fringe tidbit: some units celebrated raids by tossing captured enemy boots into friendly dugouts as trophies, though mismatched pairs led to confusion and foot blisters. Historians still argue whether such celebrations honored bravery or glorified needless risk. You drink a gulp of water from your canteen, tasting freshness like redemption. You wipe mud and sweat from your brow. Your limbs tremble, not from cold, but from the thrill and terror of survival. You glance at your watch at 3:14 a.m. You tuck your rifle close and settle onto the duckboards, the stolen papers at your side as a testament to the night's success. You whisper in the dark, "Job done." You close your eyes, allowing fatigue to wash over you. In the dim glow, you embrace a fleeting sense of triumph amid the trench's endless horrors. A restless dawn finds you unable to sleep. Nightmares mingle with reality as every creak of timber feels like an exhumed corpse shifting in its grave. Today's order: strengthen defenses and await counterattack. You probably won't survive the next onslaught without eyes sharper than a hawk's and heart firmer than steel. You peel yourself off the duckboards and check your rifle cleaned, oiled, ready. Mainstream fact: by 1918, infantry units standardized daily weapons inspections to ensure maximum reliability under fire. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers hid hairpins or bits of flint in their rifles as makeshift firing pin replacements, though many found the jury-rigged fixes jammed at the worst possible moment. Historians still argue whether field improvisations did more good than harm. Your gaze shifts to the mud-smeared trench wall where comrades hammer in spare timber supports and lay fresh sandbags. You join a small party reinforcing a vulnerable section marked with chalk, Sector B6. A sapper hands you a heavy sandbag. You heft it into place atop a sagging revetment. Your arms burn, but you hold fast. Joke 1. It's the only time your gym coach will praise trench burpees. Rain drizzles turning every surface slick. You shove the bag deeper, patting the seam to seal gaps against splinters and shrapnel. A corporal inspects the work, nods curtly, and then marches off to the next breach. You follow, placing more bags and twisting barbed wire coils into denser barricades. Fringe tidbit: one regiment used empty artillery shells, filled with concrete as makeshift bollards within their sandbag lines. Soldiers nicknamed them concrete casings. Historians still argue whether such heavy reinforcements truly blocked enemy fire or simply weighed down the trench floor. Your boots slide on wet timber, and you steady yourself against the corrugated iron roof. You glance upward, a bird's nest. Built in a corner, eggs, cracked by morning dew and scattered shells. You pause, heart tightening at the dead hatchlings, a harsh reminder that life here is fragile. Mainstream fact: wildlife surprisingly thrived in some trench sections, but heavy rain and shelling often destroyed habitats overnight. Fringe tidbit: after one bombardment, soldiers discovered a family of fox cubs nesting in a collapsed dugout, adopting and feeding them, until a higher command ordered their removal. Historians still argue whether trench fauna offered genuine comfort or cruel false hope. You move on to check communication lines. Cables sag between stanchions and the worn insulation frayed. You kneel to splice wires, careful that a misstep won't sever the link. A snap echoes, one wire end fell into the mud, shorting the line. You connect it with practiced fingers, sending a test message, Sector B6 secure. A crackled reply confirms. Joke 2. You just performed defibrillation on dead wires. And it's usually easier than reviving a snail. You stand muscles protesting and scan the trench for lurking danger. The morning quiet is too complete. Even the rats are subdued. Your senses hum, any moment orders could bark, whistles shrill, or shells scream. A runner appears, breathless, handing you a folded map marked with anticipated enemy approach routes. He warns of heavy artillery, due in 2 hours. You pocket the map, gaze, following its red arrows, pointing straight at your reinforced wall. Mainstream fact: counter-battery fire was common. Once a raid revealed enemy gun positions. Both sides perfected triangulation to target big guns. Fringe tidbit: some gunners painted their artillery bright yellow on top, hoping aerial reconnaissance would mistake them for decoys. Historians still argue whether such visual tricks ever fooled observers or merely painted targets on your back. You take a deep breath, tasting coppery anticipation. You loiter by the traverse, an angled wall section, designed to absorb blast, but you know it's no guarantee. The air vibrates with tension, like the instant before a galloping horse crashes through your door. Joke 3. You're about to find out if reinforced sandbags beat reinforced morale. You duck under a low timber, emerging into a wider junction, where medics and stretcher crews wait on standby. You nod to a corporal who holds a board listing priority evacs with names scrawled in pencil. You run your finger down the list, hoping not to see your name. Rain intensifies, pattering on corrugated sheets. You hug a crate for shelter, watching droplets race each other down the iron. You think of the trench's constant plumbing drips that could lull you into a moment's respite or send you tumbling if you glanced away. You pat your pockets, feeling a small wooden crucifix carved by a chaplain. You finger its edges, drawing silent comfort. Historians still argue whether personal faith genuinely sustained soldiers or simply offered a psychological crutch. Fringe tidbit: some men exchanged faith tokens, chaplain-carved crosses or prayer books, salvaged from the wreckage, believing they shared divine protection. You stand upright and march back to Sector B6, bearing a bucket of cement for patching a crater breach in the parapet. You kneel and fill gaps between sandbags, shaping the mortar with gloved hands. Your back aches, but you push on. Distant rumblings hint at the approaching barrage. Your heartbeat sinks to the faint cadence, each roll of thunder magnified. You rise, stepping back, wiping your hands on your jacket. Mainstream fact: rushed repairs often failed under the next barrage, leading to cyclical toil that drained manpower. Fringe tidbit: some units painted fresh repairs in bright colors at night so enemy bombardment would fall on untouched segments, though daylight revealed the ruse. And everyone had a good laugh. Historians still argue whether visual camouflage adjustments were tactical or purely morale-boosting. You glance at your watch, 15 minutes to impact. You grip your rifle and move to cover behind the new sandbag crest. You peer over just as the first shell bursts, mud and debris rain down, but your barrier holds. You press, flat heart-pounding as successive shells pummel the trench. You taste grit and sweat chest tightening. You hold on to the sandbag, reminding yourself that every added layer of earth and timber means one more chance at survival. You brace for the longest 5 minutes of your life. When the barrage lifts, you emerge, lungs heaving. The trench behind your wall is battered timbers, cracked sandbags, slumped but intact. You brush the mud from your helmet and smile grimly. You survived. You take a slow breath, letting relief wash through your veins like warm soup. You pat the repaired wall, whispering thanks maybe to luck skills or that carved crucifix. You straighten shoulders back and prepare to face the day's next challenge, knowing that here in the trench, survival is measured in inches of sand and lengths of wire. And in moments like this, when you stand alive amid the wreckage, a muted hush settles over the trench as you and your comrades brace for nightfall's approach. The sky bleeds amber as the sun dips, casting long shadows that pool in every hollow. You probably won't survive this night without relying on the camaraderie that binds you tighter than steel. You move through the trench flashlight sparingly flicked, checking on each dugout. Mainstream fact units often rotated men between frontline support and reserve trenches to share burdens and maintain morale. Fringe tidbit. Some platoons held midnight foot drill parades under dim lamps to sharpen discipline and stave off nerves, though many complained they were just exercises in sleep deprivation. Historians still argue whether these drills improved combat readiness or simply exhausted soldiers further. At Dugout C, you find a group playing cards with lantern glow jam jar lids as makeshift chips. You join with a nod, pulling up a wooden crate as a chair. Laughter mingles with the clink of tin cups as someone deals. The dim light flickers, illuminating weary faces softened by camaraderie. Joke 1. It's the only casino where the house always wins and you're already on a losing streak. You play a round of 2-penny brag, each hand a chance to forget the day's horrors. A private cheats with sleight of hand earning mock outrage and frisking hunts for hidden cards. You banter trading barbs that sting less than bullets. Fringe tidbit, some soldiers stashed playing cards in boot toes for easy concealment, then dealt games on overturned helmets when dugouts flooded. Historians still argue whether such diversions truly bolstered spirits or merely delayed more vital rest. Mainstream fact recreation in the trenches cards, songs, impromptu shows was encouraged to keep men mentally fit. You stand to stretch cramped muscles, the boots' cramped confines, reminding you how close you are to the earth's damp breath. You rub your knuckles and exchange cigars from a shared tin, lighting one off another. The smoke curls through the lantern's haze, carrying a familiar comfort. Joke 2. It's ironic that the one safe bet here is your death from smoke inhalation. You glance at your trench map pinned to the wall. Patrol routes for tonight scrawled in chalk. Tomorrow's dawn patrol will scout enemy wire for any fresh threats. You finger the route, memorizing loops and landmarks. Then you hear a distant whistle, the signal to stand down, card games, and man listening posts. You rise and rejoin your unit, weapons ready. You crouch in pairs at designated listening points, each team spaced yards apart in near silence. The first patrol leader whispers that 2 of you should edge into no man's land, 10 yards, to check the wire perimeter. You volunteer without a second's hesitation. Message runners call you steady hands, and you intend to live up to the name. Joke 3. You always wanted to moonlight as a wiring inspector, just never imagined moonlight meant bayonet ready and half blind. You slip over the parapet, moving like a ghost across the flattened earth. Silver light washes the barbed wire, turning it into a web of spectral blades. You crouch, low knife in hand, slicing any stray coils that droop, a silent surgeon tending a living wound. Historians still argue whether nighttime wire maintenance significantly reduced casualties or simply invited more enemy patrols. To investigate the lights-out activity, fringe, tidbit, some units marked safe passages with luminescent fungus gathered at dawn, though the glow faded after hours, leaving workers stranded in pitch black. You finish the last coil, rising to seal the gap with spare wire tucked in your belt. You nod to your partner and together you slip back into the trench hearts, still pounding. The moon dips lower and you wonder how long before enemy flares ignite the sky again. You return to the dugout entrance, wiping sweat and dew from your brow. Your hands shake less than they did at midnight. Practice has steadied your resolve. You exchange a silent nod with the corporal on duty. He grunts approval. You step back into the card game circle, relief flooding your chest. Someone deals another round. You hesitate, then sit. You draw your cards, ace and jack, the best possible hand. A rare victory that makes you laugh out loud, startling even yourself. You rest your elbows on your knees, cigar smoke twisting around you as laughter fades into calm chatter. The lantern flickers low and you recall the day's toil, reinforcing walls, repelling attacks, scavenging craters and tonight's wirework. You tilt your head back and let the words of an old hymn drift through your mind. Chaplain-led singing, once echoed in quieter trenches. You hum softly the melody, merging with the night breeze. You glance at the sky, a sliver of moon, disappearing behind clouds. You close your eyes for a moment, savoring peace. In a world built on chaos. You rise, stub out your cigar in a tin, and stand. You check your rifle one last time, then stride to your listening post. You whisper to the shadows, "We'll see daylight again." Your final rotation before rest begins as the sun crests the eastern lip of the trench, painting mud and timber in a pale, weary glow. You trudge forward to the muster point rifle slung at the ready, every muscle humming with fatigue. You probably won't survive much comfort here, but you'll cherish whatever respite you can seize. You report to the sergeant, who glances at the duty roster and nods you toward the connecting trench leading to relief lines. Mainstream fact tours in frontline trenches typically lasted 6 to 10 days before soldiers were rotated back for rest and reorganization. Fringe tidbit, some units joked that the rest trenches were merely shallower graves, as boredom and disease could strike as easily as bullets. Historians still argue whether shorter tours improved combat effectiveness or simply shuffled exhausted men between hells. You step into the support trench, a dim gallery of twisted metal floodlit only by occasional lamps. Here, the mud is slightly drier, and the timber supports seem sturdier, though nothing lasts long under this sky's relentless dampness. You inhale the difference. Air is still thick with cordite, but less rank with rot. You pass the cookhouse where a corporal hollers your name and offers a steaming mug of tea. No rum yet, though you wouldn't turn it down. You accept the mug with a grateful nod, savoring the light bitterness. It warms your chest as you sip the simple act of drinking again, reminding you of life beyond mud and wire. Your pack is hefted off your shoulders by a comrade who tosses you a spare blanket. You catch it instinctively, feeling its weight a small comfort. You wrap it around yourself, reveling in the faint scratch of fresh wool against skin that's known only lice-laden uniforms for days. Joke 1. It's the only trench you've ever left, feeling warmly betrayed. You slump onto a raised duckboard bench, patting the spot beside you. A buddy collapses in kind boots, still caked inside out. You laugh at the symmetry. Two soldiers united by exhaustion. Around you, the support trench hums, With activity stretcher bearers ferry in the wounded engineers, clap timber supports back into place, and supply parties wheel in crates of fresh bread. Mainstream fact support trenches housed reserve troops, medical stations, and logistics hubs, forming the backbone of the trench network. Fringe tidbit. Some regiments painted murals on support trench walls, maps, motivational slogans, even caricatures of commanding officers to inject color into the gloom. Historians still argue whether such art brightens spirits or risked giving the enemy outlines to sketch. You unwrap a piece of bread to crust, crisp and crumbly. You break it in half, sharing one half with your comrade, before spreading a sliver of jam, a luxury parcel donation from home, on your half. You savor its sweetness, recalling the letter from your sister. You close your eyes, taste mingling with memory. Joke 2. You'd wage another war just for a jar of strawberry jam. You drain your tea and sit back, letting your mind drift. You think of home, the garden lilies. Your old dogs bark the way rain feels on a porch, rather than the drip through corrugated steel. Each memory is a lifeline, tethering you to a gentler world. As you rest, infantrymen heading forward pass by, faces pale with morning chill. You nod solemnly, offering the blanket you shed one small gesture in a day of countless horrors. They offer silent thanks and press on, disappearing into the yawning trench ahead. You check your watch 15 minutes until relief arrives. You tuck the blanket around your shoulders again, clinging to warmth while you wait. The minutes crawl, measured by distant artillery booms that ripple through earth and bone. Your comrade nudges you, pointing toward the relief party emerging from a side tunnel. Fresh faces in crisp uniforms. Rifles polished, clean men who still believe they'll conquer this war. You stand as they file past trading places. You feel their optimism brush you like a breeze. You shoulder your rifle once more and step forward into the dividing trench. You pause at the lip, taking in the scene, a world of mud wire and shattered dreams that you've called home. You exhale deeply, resolve to coalesce in your chest. Mainstream fact rotation. Back to reserve or rest trenches was often a bittersweet relief as new arrivals replaced comrades you'd grown to rely on. Fringe tidbit. Some soldiers marked relief days by carving the date on trench walls with bayonet tips. Festive graffiti amid despair. Historians still argue whether carving dates brightened spirits or simply grimly counted down days of misery. You slip into the new depth, the relief trenches' comparatively dry walls enveloping you like a reluctant embrace. You resist the urge to collapse instead, marching forward until you reach the dugout where your squad leader awaits. He surveys your face unreadable, then gives the order, rest up but stay sharp. You duck inside, laying down your pack and rifle. A cot awaits, splintered but serviceable. You sit on its edge blanket, releasing you into its fold. You adjust your helmet to serve as a makeshift pillow and lie back, limbs trembling into stillness. Your eyelids droop and you slip into a doze, yet your mind churns with memories of the trench, the mud, the wire, the rats, the gas, the laughter, the prayers, the letters. Each image flickers across the stage of your thoughts. You drift deeper consciousness, softening until the banging of a faraway shell echoes through your skull, pulling you to the thin edge between wakefulness and sleep. You shrug, nestling deeper into the cot, and let the rhythm of distant artillery guide you toward dreams. Now imagine the mud settling into stillness, its cold embrace replaced by the soft warmth of shelter. Feel the blanket's gentle weight on your shoulders, as if the world's burdens have been lifted just enough to cradle you in comfort. The constant drum of guns fades into a distant murmur, a lullaby of past violence receding beyond the horizon. Your breath deepens each inhale, drawing in the faint aroma of tea and wood smoke. Each exhale releasing the ache of days spent in mud. Let your heartbeat slow, sinking to the steady pulse of your resting comrades around you. In this moment, you are safe, surrounded by strangers who just hours ago were bound by fear. But now, share this fragile peace. Allow your thoughts to drift to home, the laughter of loved ones, the hush of a nighttime breeze, the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Picture the garden your sister described, blossoms swaying in sunlight, their petals brushing the sky so different from these trench walls, yet alive with the same enduring will to grow. Here, in this fragile interlude, embrace the knowledge that every dawn you survive brings you one step closer to a world beyond trenches. Each breath is a promise, each heartbeat a tribute to resilience. You rest now, giving your weary body permission to heal. Softly, the distant artillery sighs, but you no longer feel its weight. Instead, you rest in a gentle stillness, guided by the comforting whisper of survival. Let your eyelids close fully and drift into a sleep unmarred by mud, knowing that when you awaken, you'll carry this peace forward one small victory at a time.